Hello there! It is the year of our Lord Sigmar 2025 of the Imperial calendar, and the Total War Warhammer trilogy has been a part of our lives for the better part of a decade now. In that time, it's blossomed into arguably the most colorful and diverse strategy game on the market, with an absolutely absurd amount of content, factions, and unique units to choose from. But that variety can be overwhelming, even if you're a veteran in the series, so we're going to try to make things a bit more digestible here by focusing the spotlight on the MVPs for each roster, for which there are now 24 separate unique races. When I say digestible, this video is probably still going to be like over an hour long. It's the most in-depth and comprehensive unit spotlight I have ever done, and frankly, I delayed making it for a very long time because I expected it to be a bit of a behemoth, and certainly that has proven true. But here it is, the best units for every faction 2025, dropping a month or two before the full release of Tides of Torment. But what does best mean, and what are the basic ground rules we'll be applying here to select them? Well, if you've seen these in the past, we typically examine a unit's viability through an inexact calculation, formula, what have you, looking at some combination of versatility, cost efficiency, utility, battlefield performance, animations, and whether or not they are a staple of their faction, seen in many different matchups. We are not simply looking at the most expensive unit with the biggest stat line. That will very frequently lead you down the wrong path if you're just looking at unit cards, and in my opinion, it's a horrible way to approach this topic. There are tons of elite units and tier 5 monsters in this game that are not very good, and plenty of low-tier light cav or specialists that are amazing in their roles. So in this discussion, we're going to try to take every game mode into consideration, including campaign and domination, but regular land battle will serve as the main foundation for our conclusions here, because that is where units behave most like themselves, without all those additional confounding variables that come from specific lord effects, chevrons, red tree skill bonuses, and technology that can completely alter the output of a unit and turn it into something else. There will be no regiments of renown here, no lords, no heroes, just pure, unchevroned vanilla units. And as always, you will not agree with every unit on this list, and that is completely fine. For some factions, the answer isn't very clear-cut at all. The debate is honestly half the fun. We'll probably end up giving this one more go before the end of the trilogy, once there are no more big content drops or patches planned, but hopefully that will not be for many years yet to come. Big shout out and thank you to Creative Assembly for sponsoring this video, and to the Night Crew and XMT guys for helping to discuss and compile this extensive and comprehensive list of units. Without further ado, let's get it poppin'. Now, for most of this video, we're going to keep the factions in alphabetical order, but as we travel to the Mountains of Khorne, the Ogre Kingdoms are going to get special treatment here and lead off the video because their best unit is a special breed of disgusting. Ogres have been positively feasting since Omens of Destruction, widely considered one of the best factions across all game modes currently, and no single unit embodies that strength better than the Thunder Tusk. This thing is an absolute world beater, devastating in every single facet of combat, with a frankly absurd amount of utility, DPS, and general tankiness. That's a very good argument for being considered the best unit in Immortal Empires right now, and if it's not, it's certainly in the top 3. It's the biggest misprice in the trilogy after the OG Thunder Barge when it first came out for Thrones, and really, it should have been priced more like 3,300 gold instead of 2,300 with its current stat line and performance. It is quite literally banned in land battle and domination tournaments. You are not allowed to bring them at all, and that's because of a confluence of factors. It's a terror-causing, high missile resist monster with a massive HP pool, 1,000 more health than the Stonehorn for some reason. That part doesn't really make any sense. With double slows from Chilling Aura and Frostbite that drop enemy speed by 60% and make it impossible to properly dodge its missile attack. Its built-in snowball catapult can be quite devastating in and of itself, slowing the enemy's approach and blasting infantry apart. But once they finally close into melee, they're then met with a Titan in CQB with fantastic animations, brutal impact damage, and cycle charge potential. It will pancake armored cav, turn elite halberds into red mist, and if you manage to finally drag it down to get it on the verge of routing after sacrificing everything humanly possible to do so, guess what? Ogres have the best single target healing in the game, and obviously they're going to use it on their win condition expensive monster that can solo carry entire battles. Troll Guts and Meat Feast will take a 30% health Thunder Tusk back up to full, where it will happily continue its rampage, and then you're not going to have anything left to kill it. Oh yeah, and you know how the Stonehorn is a mount option for the Hunter hero, who gives it armor-piercing javelins, and how it has another variant with a harpoon launcher? Well, for some reason, the Thunder Tusk gets both built into the unit, with the exact same projectile profiles, which means it has 800 plus missile damage, constantly shooting out from 2 separate sources at point blank range. Those javelins and bolts are painful. They massively increase its DPS in close quarters combat and can stagger lock foot characters or even Gorgons into oblivion. Yes, this bonus versus infantry artillery monster can beat a Gorgon, an AP bonus versus large specialist, 1v1. It has magic attacks, so it ignores physical resist and poops on demons. It's an ice monster that for some reason isn't weak to flame. It's an artillery piece that's better in melee than the dedicated melee monster, the Stonehorn, of the same faction. It's almost exhausting listing every possible thing this unit can do. There is no debate here. It is convincingly the best Ogre unit and arguably the best in the entire trilogy right meow. Getting back on track alphabetically, the Beastmen, the Cloven Ones and red-headed stepchildren of Chaos, unloved, used, and abused by their dark gods, will be next on the agenda. In a faction known for their lightning-fast ambushes, high mobility, and general horniness, Centaurs feel like the quintessential beastly archetype that distills their entire essence as a race down into a single rowdy package. And believe me when I say, they are packing heat. Centaurs with throwing axes are the best Beastmen unit, and I don't think it's particularly close. They're a fairly cheap and incredibly versatile armor-piercing skirmish cav unit with perfect vigor, functional in melee, devastating to single entities and armor units from range, and almost impossible to catch. There isn't a whole lot that throwing axe Centaurs cannot do on the battlefield. They're useful in a wide variety of matchups against a bunch of different factions and in a wide variety of roles. They will shred armored monsters like Lizardmen dinos. They can Vanguard deploy to catch an enemy army flat-footed and out of position. They can cause devastating damage from range before seamlessly shifting into a melee role to run down backlines with impunity or chase opponents' cavalry off the map. And in the late game, they will happily provide the hammer in your hammer and anvils that seals the deal and ultimately breaks the enemy's resolve. They aren't world beaters unto themselves. They won't typically carry a battle straight up in the way that maybe a Gorgon can, but they always pick and choose their fights, and they only get better the more skilled you become at the game. Micro them well, pick the right engagements for them, and they can become an overwhelming and incredibly annoying force multiplier in pretty much any engagement you can think of. In the lands of fair Bretonnia, there is but one choice for oppressing poxy peasants and slaying the foul monsters that prowl the countryside. It is the hungry Hippogriff Knights. Very few units in this trilogy have ever gotten to glow up in the way Royal Hippogriff Knights did with their Grail rework. They used to not be Grail Knights at all, and while they've certainly never been a terrible unit, they were absolutely supercharged when they supped from Sydney Sweeney's bathwater. In that overhaul, they went from 8 to 12 models on Ultra, they got a flat 15% ward save from Blessing of the Lady, and most importantly, they gained Perfect Vigor, which is an absolutely disgusting buff for a unit designed to carry battles in the darkest of hours. An exhausted unit in Warhammer 3 receives a 30% nerf to their melee attack and charge bonus, a 15% reduction in speed, they lose 25% of their armor, and take a whole bunch of other malices to leadership, melee defense, AP damage, and reload speed. Perfect Vigor ignores all of that, ensuring they stay fighting at peak efficiency no matter how long they're engaged or sprinting around the battlefield. Royal Hippogriff Knights are an anti-everything unit. There is nothing they cannot severely damage or kill outright, and whatever the enemy's main value piece is, wherever it is on the battlefield, that is where they are headed, and that is what their task is going to be, to murder it. They're really adept at it too, because as flying monstrous cavalry, they always dictate their own engagements, can always pick and choose the best moment to strike, and will always get their charge while denying the enemy theirs, because they're coming in from above. If it's cavalry or infantry on the ground, they physically cannot get their charge bonus off before the hippogriffs make contact. Which means even traditional counters like elite halberds or anti-large monstrous cavalry isn't as big a threat to them as you'd think. Because of their low model count, they don't really take damage from spells, and they're an amazing target for healing spells like Overcast Regrowth. With huge weapon strength values and a hefty armor-piercing component, combined with magic attacks, high mass, and chariot-like functionality that lets them pull through units very easily, they will rip armored units apart in seconds flat, then tear out them from the battlefield. It is a brutal combination of endurance and punching power that simply does not lose efficacy as the battle drags on. From the fiery forges of Zarnagrun come the demonic hell trains of the Chaos Dwarfs, and far and away the best unit on their roster right now is the Iron Demon Dreadquake Mortar with the Hellbound upgrade. This unit has always had absurd killing power, quite literally capable of obliterating entire armies single-handedly, but it wasn't until fairly recently that it received its most important buff, a feature that may not have been fully intentional. Picture a mobile artillery tank with huge armor values and essentially infinite mass that can run over and through infantry, cavalry, and most unit archetypes in the game without being pinned down. Give it the ability to explode entire enemy formations from Empire Great Cannon range, suppressing, slowing, and outright murdering hundreds of models as they attempt to cross the beaten zone, and make it unbreakable so it fights the last HP. Give it perfect vigor so it rarely gets tired or loses stats, and then imagine, after being pounded incessantly and losing most of your elite troops from downtown, you finally get a good engagement and fully surround it with armor-piercing troops and cavalry. Surely you've won now, right? You've got the train bottled up, tied down, and fallen to pieces like Jigsaw in the box. Nope, it activates more power for a huge boost to acceleration, mass, and speed, pushes through everything without a care in the world, and more importantly, it can just shoot itself because its minimum fire arc is essentially 0. If you get a full surround off on the Iron Demon Dreadquake mortar, it will just shoot itself with the mortar, and everything around it will die. Yeah, because of the way monsters and single entity units work in Total War, explosion damage and certain spell types do almost nothing to low or 1 model count troop choices, which means you cannot surround it with 48 to 60 model count cav or any regular foot troops. They'll get deleted. They will literally explode, and the train will deal essentially 0 friendly fire damage to itself because it only counts as 1 entity. On top of that insanely powerful mortar, one of, if not the most devastating siege pieces and blob killers in the game, it also has an Iron Demon train in front with double barrel blasting potential in melee with a good missile profile. And it's fast enough and has a janky enough hitbox that killing it is quite difficult even for single entity monster hunters and duelists. With perfect vigor and 20% physical resistance above 25% HP with that Hellbound upgrade, it is an extremely potent kiting piece. It is just a nightmare to deal with and can put down an insurrection in pretty much any game mode. I don't think it's a coincidence that the top 3 units so far have perfect vigor, and this train will be running all night long, baby. Alright, let's talk Daemons of Chaos, and this is an interesting one because obviously they share units from all the different mono gods, Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle. Slaanesh at the moment is in that echelon of top land battle and domination factions, although it still remains to be seen if Tides of Torment will kick them up into the upper echelons of campaign, where they've arguably languished a bit, certainly have some very apparent flaws there, but if you've watched battles with Slaanesh recently, you'll know that their damage output and ability to pick and choose engagements in the blink of an eye makes them top tier, especially in the hands of a good player. So it should be no surprise that the best DOC unit is in fact the Seekers of Slaanesh, widely considered one of the most overpowered units in the game right now. Sometime, I believe, between Thrones of Decay and Omens of Destruction, Steeds of Slaanesh received an extremely impactful change to their hitbox that essentially made it elliptical rather than rectangular. In layman's terms, this allowed them to pile into a target way more effectively instead of constantly bumping into each other and blockading each other from joining the fight, to the point where they will now melt just about anything in seconds, provided they take a good engagement, which for Slaanesh, particularly in the hands of a strong competitive player with good micro, is quite easy to accomplish. They will shred infantry, they will slice open cavalry with that devastating flanker penalty, and they will eviscerate armored, expensive, elite single entity monsters. Nothing is safe when Seekers get the fight they want, and they almost always get the fight they want. 100 speed, poison, 75% AP split with Vanguard, magic attacks, and devastating flanker for doubling their 40 charge bonus to 80 when hitting the flank or rear. It's a gross unit on paper that gets even more disgusting when handled by a high-skilled player with good micro. It's one of those units that truly shines when handled with competence, and in those hands, it becomes a true terror of the battlefield because it is so damn good at punishing small missteps or positioning flaws. Perhaps the best example I can give you is Pavane of Slaanesh, which damages and rampages an enemy unit. The Seeker and Pavane combo almost single-handedly makes bringing elite cav or monsters a non-starter against Slaanesh, because they can bait an opponent at will, completely out of position with rampage, then pounce on it and obliterate it with impunity. The main counter is to simply go really wide, drown them in chaff and crappy light cav units like Kislevite dervishes, because to bring armored elites against them is to invite death. But we're actually going to go out of alphabetical order one more time here and talk about the best unit for Slaanesh now, because it's a direct continuation of what we just discussed. Now, if Seekers are the best Demons of Chaos unit, surely they'd be the best Slaanesh unit too, right? Frankly, yeah, you can make a very good argument for them on the Dark Princes roster as well, but here's the thing. On the Demons of Chaos roster, you have a ton of range units and different tools to work with that will typically force an opponent to move up and engage because they don't want to get shot. You'll see a lot of different army comps and strategies to try and counter your demonic builds. That isn't the case with Slaanesh, particularly in land battle. People know what you're going to be bringing. They know by far the best way to deal with Slaanesh is to box up and play very defensively to deny the flank and rear charges and the cavalry fights on the open field. Here, in this situation, Seekers of Slaanesh don't have the same ability to dominate because they simply don't provide the same value when they're forced to charge headlong into braced spears to bust a defensive nut. Because Slaanesh doesn't have ranged units to pull you out of the box and force you to engage straight up, where they can then pull you apart using their speed and maneuverability. What they need in the situation is something that can break open a box, that will open up the juicy center so they can gorge themselves on the fleshy interior. What's the unit that does that best on the Slaaneshi roster? Well, it's the Fiends. This is a unit that doesn't have the killing power of Seekers, but is much better in the grind, and functions like absurdly fast monstrous infantry at 95 speed. They can be anywhere they're needed at a moment's notice and can hammer an anvil or run down routing troops very effectively with rending talons designed to rip open armor. They can operate out on the flank with cav or hunt down an opponent's skirmish line, providing a wide variety of useful roles. But their true calling is to saturate infantry, almost like crypt horrors or trolls, where you plop them in the melee grind on top of marauders or chaos warriors, let their soporific musk debuff enemy attack and defense by 5, and just let them grind it out, baby. And they're starting to take a little too much damage, which can happen with their low armor value of 30. You just reposition and look for a weak spot somewhere else, and they will function like a force multiplier in any engagement, debuffing an enemy and striking with little to no notice because of their speed. Just ensure you're never charging anything that can hurt them straight on. It's flank or rear attacks into enemy cav and monsters, or saturated with infantry support on the main battle line. If they go in undefended and unsupported, they will be squished. But if you follow those rules, these Serpentine Freaks are a dangerous and powerful tool in the Dark Prince's arsenal. But while Slaanesh is getting freaky with the Fiends and seeking booties to plunder, the Dark Elves are gravitating away from the sins of the flesh and instead feasting upon it. It's dinosaur time, and the Noglir, the Cold One Knights, are without question the best Druchii unit right now. Just like Seekers and Steeds of Slaanesh, Cold One Cavalry shifted from rectangular hitboxes to elliptical models, which is a huge boon when it comes to DPS against a wide array of targets. And as soon as that change happened, they started hitting like Mack trucks. More models piling in and attacking the same target means quicker elimination of the threat and less damage taken in return. And their damage output is insanely impressive now. They straight up beat or trade effectively with the vast majority of cav and monsters in Immortal Empires, and their rules of engagement are very straightforward. If it's an easy engagement, like Empire Knights, be aggressive, seek it out, go right in, they will shred Armored Knights in the 850 to 1100 gold range. If you're outmatched, looking at like Fireborn Dragon Princes or Horned Ones, Demis with Halberds, that sort of thing, they don't have to be used like traditional cavalry. You don't take the fight straight up. Because of that elliptical model change, they saturate into infantry quite effectively now, and can be used like monstrous infantry almost, in a defensive role to help mulch through the center, pulling back to eliminate the high-value enemy cav with the help of infantry when it seeks a flank or rear charge opportunity. So if you see the Fireborn moving out to the flank to rear charge you, wait until they get a little bit closer, send a chaff unit to go absorb the charge, then overlap, and that's going to be a fight that you're going to be willing to take every step of the way. With high armor and weapon strength, they're built for the grind, and they tend to not really want to rout because of that plus 15 leadership buff from Murderous Prowess. They'll often fight to maybe like the last couple models before laying down to die. Now, it is true, their stat line does not look crazy impressive on paper outside of that, but as I've said before, don't get caught stat watching. There's a lot more that makes a unit strong than numbers in a database, and if that's the thing you'd like to stroke yourself off to anyway, Murderous Prowess certainly makes them pop a lot more in the eye test. It's an absurdly good buff to melee attack, vigor, charge bonus, and leadership that lasts for a minute and a half when fighting tends to be the fiercest and the outcome of battle is still in the balance. Murderous Prowess and Primal Instincts together combine to turn Cold One Knights into a bit of a late game powerhouse near the end of fights, because they'll get infused with all kinds of combat steroids that help to make up for models lost, steroids that other equivalent units typically won't be getting. Their performance against all units, infantry included, is way better than it used to be since the hitbox change. They're a very good unit now. And these scary beasts we'll see play in just about every Dark Elf build imaginable across multiple game modes. If you haven't given them a shot recently, try them out. On to the Dwarfs of the World's Edge Mountains. You might hear the Flight of the Valkyries starting to play as Huey chopper gunners from Vietnam make their approach. If you're thinking aerial supremacy for the Dawi here, you'd be correct, but maybe not in the way you expected. Yes, the Thunder Barge was maybe the most stupidly overpowered unit in Warhammer DLC history, and it can still be an auto win in some matchups. It's widely hated and banned in multiplayer tournaments the world over as a result. And if you run into Malachi early game as Norsca, the Spirit of Grungni can be pretty unpleasant to deal with there in campaign too. But no, it's been successfully nerfed in multiple patches. Its price has been increased substantially. It does not have the honor of being the best dwarf unit anymore. Instead, that commendation shall fall to the gyrocopters with steam and brimstone, and we're kind of doing a 2-for-1 special here because they're used interchangeably and I would argue are inextricably linked in terms of battlefield role. Gyrocopters were reworked heavily quite a few patches ago, and since then have kind of been a nightmare to deal with across a wide variety of game modes. In that overhaul, they lost some melee stats, but went from 4 models to 12, and their bombs weren't changed at all. You can imagine taking 4 bombs that were already pretty decent and adding 200% more of them in a single volley is a fairly sizable change in and of itself, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Gyrocopters are the ace in the hole that breaks the mold when it comes to the Dawi, a unit that must always be in the back of your mind and game plan for if you're fighting them, that will dictate your own unit selections when facing them quite heavily, but stands in complete opposition to how most of the roster plays. So if you go all in to counter gyros and the dwarves don't bring any, you kind of just auto lose. So from a mind game perspective, solely, they're a big problem. But in a practical scenario, the way they're used most effectively is by pairing a steam gun gyro and a brimstone gyro together. Despite the almost 100 missile damage difference on their unit cards, both variants have similar damage output against most targets, but where they really shine is their ability to manipulate enemy morale. Steam guns deal artillery damage, imbuing leadership penalty of -8 for being under artillery fire, -8 leadership on top of that for being under missile fire, then -8 from the burnt contact effect on the brimstone gun flamethrowers. Combine that with the burst damage from 2 gyros shooting a unit simultaneously, and many standard troop choices will be wavering or routing before battle lines even begin to clash. This is a 100 armor, 100 speed, triple leadership penalty combo that can drop bombs to explode blobs, cause all kinds of carnage from the air, avoid missile fire and counter battery, and then transition into auto-hit enemy troops in melee with a flying charge bonus from behind in mid to late game. Extraordinarily effective when the chips are down and you need something to deliver that final coup de grace to rout off a unit. And once enemy cav and mobility are gone, they can kind of just hammer an anvil at will for big leadership penalties. Versatile, ubiquitous, and a vicious choice in campaign or multiplayer, there's a reason they've been capped or banned in many competitive tournaments. On to our battle brothers in Sigmar. For Prince and Emperor, the War Wagons are taking the top spot for the Empire, and as with a few other factions on this list, particularly the Combined Arms factions, there's no real obvious standout for this roster that rests head and shoulders above everything else. You can make good arguments for Free Company Militia in Domination, land ships across game modes because they just straight dumpster some matchups and make it impossible to play, or Huntsman is one of the best archer types in the game right now with some really nasty synergies with Plague of Rust, but we're going War Wagons here because while they certainly don't have the peaks and straight beatdown potential of a land ship, they also aren't unusable or a massive fun sink in a bunch of matchups either. They used to be a meme pick, no question, widely considered one of the worst choices in the early days of Hunter and the Beast, but that was a long time ago. A lot has changed over the life cycle of Mortal and Immortal Empires. This is a cost-efficient unit with great mobility, difficult to tie down and destroy that can make life miserable for pretty much any of your expensive dragons, elite armored knights, or monstrous infantry, cav, what have you. It has high mass of 2,000, allowing it to function like a chariot and punish units in melee when the opportunity presents itself, but it's also able to dodge and absorb missile fire or enemy cav charges, who tend to have difficulty hitting its jank hitbox when it's on the move. They're tall and can park themselves right on top of halberds or other melee troops, shooting into CQB from point-blank range without worrying about line of sight, and while they don't have insane burst damage by any stretch of the imagination, that can sometimes be a benefit. Because people don't really notice them or see those eye-popping volleys where the lazy health bar disappears, they're not necessarily going to react to it in the same way. Instead, these units are constantly harassing and plonking and grinding down your most important troops over time until you finally notice, like, hey, where'd all the HP go on my elite cav, or my Hyro Titan, or my expensive lord? What the hell happened? Well, it was probably war wagons cutting the shit out of you, popping caps in your ass over and over and over until you can no longer contest them properly. They do require longer games to fully accrue their value, but they are so annoying and so good at what they do that I felt like they were deserving of a spotlight here. But like I said, the Empire is a jack of all trades that relies on combined arms. There are quite a few different units you could slot in here depending on how you want to look at it, and you'd probably still be right. Far to the east lies another empire, the Great Bastion of Grand Cathay, and honestly, this one is gonna be contentious. It's not rage bait, I swear. Or is it? If you polled my viewers, there'd probably be significant votes for at least 6 or 7 different units on this roster, and that's for good reason. Just like the Empire, Cathay is all about combined arms and synergies. They don't really have standout units that massively outtrade or outperform in any one role, and everything relies on each other. Harmony is quite literally the mechanic that draws that all together. So why not go with the unit that makes those harmony bonuses so much stronger? The Zhangu War Drum is really cool, and while it originally was considered a bit of a meme pick, it started seeing a lot more play, and has since become the linchpin of some very powerful army compositions for Cathay, especially in land battle, where box builds were fairly dominant for quite a few patches since Shadows of Change. The War Drum is a support centerpiece that provides both yin and yang harmony bonuses to essentially the entire army, amplifying their core race mechanic to turn crap tier units into semi-beasts. These bonuses alone help to superpower Jade Warriors, Peasant Spearmen, and all the mainline stuff into legitimately tanky, cost-effective, and sometimes outright dangerous units, but that's just scratching the surface of what it does. It stacks morale bonuses out the ass, to the point where even low-tier fodder won't want to run, and while Bastion the Great City stance is good for the 24 armor and extra charge defense, the real star of the show here is Disdain of the Dragon Emperor. Crazy strong. What this does is grant +8 melee attack army-wide with +10 reload skill for gunpowder or archer units and immune to psychology. This is huge for Cathay because bad melee attack values tends to be their main problem. They hold very well, but they don't really kill things. They don't punch back. Now, suddenly you have Peasant Spears who won't tear route or regular route actually hitting with regularity, and they were already the first or second best cheap spear unit in the game next to Empire Spearmen with their 17 bonus versus large. Suddenly, you have Jade Warriors fighting to the death, while the cannons and the characters continue beating down high-value targets. Suddenly, you have a super wide army of cheap troops that are fighting like lions and cannot be dislodged from their location. With the Zhangu War Drum, this faction turns into dwarfs with cavalry and way better lord choices. Cathay relies on outstatting their opposition in a grinded out fight, and that is exactly what the War Drum offers. Not to mention, it's kind of a win condition in a way. Killing it is an attractive proposition because it's just sitting there waddling around playing Travis Barker blast beats. It's slow as hell, it's a big hitbox, buffs the entire army, and makes them way harder to kill en route, so obviously you want to go after it, but it's unbreakable. So if you invest a lot of time and resources in trying to kill it and you fail, it survives with 1 HP. It's still providing full value for the entire army until it's completely killed off. Kind of puts the bad guys in a bit of a pickle. Very useful unit that enables and even further amplifies the cohesive, combined arms tactics that make Cathay strong in the first place. It's what War Shrines wish they were. It doesn't have to worry about kill thresholds at all. Now, when it comes to the Greenskins, there was a very brief time after Omens of Destruction where Mangler Squigs would have easily taken the spot, and in the past we've gone with Forest Goblin Spider Riders and Black Orcs, but Black Orcs have kind of been power crept out of the meta over the years, and people tend to like going cheaper and wider with troops that don't waddle fatly around corners like Steven Seagal, which is certainly what Black Orcs do. They want troops that can actually pick and choose their fights, and as a result, Orc Boarboy Big Guns, which have always been there as a stable and reliable pick, have become even more prominent nowadays, and honestly, the logic I'm going to use here applies in varying degrees to most, if not all, the Orc and Savage Orc Boarboy variants. More than most of the units on this list, Boarboy Big Guns need a lot of support and outside help to do really, really well. Their baseline melee stats kind of suck, but that's how the Greenskins are designed as a race. They have inbuilt access to WoW, and their buff spells are some of the best and most spammable in the game, which is how you should be playing them and applying those abilities. Unit stats for Orcs and Goblins are developed with that in mind. So the stats on paper are, I wouldn't say irrelevant here, but they're not as important because it's frequently going to be like double or triple what you see on the unit card. What these units are is a platform for buff spells, and they are great opportunists when it comes to taking advantage of bounce spells from Greenskin Lords too. There's some nasty work you can do with them. Here we go. Fists of Gork, army-wide Wah, obviously, sneaky stabbing. There are so many cheap, spammable spells and abilities that giga boost their damage output to the point that they're a major threat to anything on the opponent's side of the field, and the uptime on those spells is crazy. You can keep dropping them on them, and instead of rocking 20 or 30 base melee attack, instead you'll be seeing like 65, 70. Great example here in terms of synergies is the Spite of the Bad Moon and Fermented Fungi combo from the Night Goblin Warboss. Just like Pavane of Slaanesh and Seekers, you fungi rampage an enemy out of position, they charge forward, you torment or sword them to root them in place, then countercharge with the extra AP and bonus first large from Spite of the Bad Moon. That kind of synergy is where the Greenskins really shine, and Boarboy Big Guns are the best at taking advantage of those buffs and punishing enemy troops when they step out of line. To be clear, they are not Seekers of Slaanesh tier, they are not on that level, but they are used in much the same way, and when utilized well, will mulch a variety of different unit archetypes in seconds flat at a very cost-efficient price point. Again, it's not uncommon to see them rocking 60 plus melee attack and way more weapon strength for large portions of a battle, and when a fast mover with that much AP at that price point makes contact, it hurts a lot. Focus your spells and abilities on whatever Boarboy Big Guns are fighting in a grind, which should be wherever the most dangerous enemy troops are. That's where you want to send the Big Guns, and they will hit way above their weight class. They trade very effectively into a lot of elite cav. For the High Elves of Ulthuan, we'll be traveling to the northern forests of Krace, where White Lions and White Lion Chariots make their home, and this unit is a problem right now. It's a hard-hitting, high mass, and fast elite chariot that shreds armored troops and has access to some of the best healing combos in the game. 30% missile resist with 82 speed makes it exceptionally difficult to kill from range, even more so than other chariots, and the stat line is misleading, of course, because of martial prowess, so add 2 attack and 12 defense to whatever you see on the front end of the menus. Big time charge, big time AP damage, and bonus versus infantry. They actually have the same mass as hippogriffs at 2,000, so they can pull out of and through some really sticky situations, which is exactly what you want to see from a chariot. But where they really take opponents to Pound Town is when operating in groups of 2 or 3. Together, they can deal surprising burst damage to enemy cavalry or single entities, operating like a wrecking ball, bouncing from one unit to another, down a battle line, and shredding everything they touch. And it works incredibly well with, you guessed it, Alariel the Everqueen with Earthblood and Star of Avalorn, that patented healing combo. If they're starting to get pinned down and bursted, drop a Star of Avalorn on their heads, they'll tank through the damage, fight hard for its duration, then push their way out and be ready to cycle charge again. If the enemy is not expecting them and bringing high mass, armor-piercing troops with bonus versus large, they can run roughshod over entire army comps almost single-handedly. Really, really gross unit when microed well. But now is the time to kill for Khorne. Blood for the Blood God, skulls for his throne. The Soul Hunter has chosen his champions, and they are the Wrathmongers, which is super fluffy and fun and thematic. It may surprise some of you, considering their initial introduction in Omens of Destruction. At launch of that DLC last December, they were nothing crazy impressive. Certainly not terrible, but didn't really jump off the page in terms of damage output in practical scenarios. That has changed a lot because they were bugged. Creative Assembly attempted to standardize splash attacks to fix some core issues with the combat loop across a bunch of factions and units, and led to some problems that had to be ironed out on a more individual basis. One of those problems was that Wrathmonger splash attacks were not working correctly. That has since been fixed, and since that change, they are straight up terrifying and embody pretty much everything you'd want to see from the best of Khorne's chosen champions. They are a hyper-elite melee blender that will rip and tear through just about anything they get their hands on. 32 model count, 10,000 HP with splash attacks means they're essentially monstrous infantry with huge HP pool per model, and they essentially cannot be killed in melee. There are very few elite units that even want to try, even when buffed by Barona's Time Warp. XMT writer Rohan was telling me a story of a match where he giga-juiced his White Lions with Barona's Time Warp and Occam's Mind Razor together and sent them into Wrathmongers. The Khorne Elite took a fat steamy dump on their chest, then went on to kill almost another full unit of Swordmasters before finally being dragged down in CQB. So typically the best option is to shoot them, because their main weakness is that they only have 70 armor, which is fine, but nothing crazy. The problem is Khorne compromises shooting incredibly well. They'll hunt your archers or gunpowder troops down with bonus infantry, marauder, axe cav, fleshhounds, furies, or other armored elites. And because they are regular infantry sized, they don't have that big profile and hitbox, something like Cryptors, they're kind of hard to shoot anyway. So you're typically not going to have time or space to shoot them, and a lot of factions just cannot deal with multiple Wrathmonger units in a single build when they're forced to close them down in melee combat. They destroy the vast majority of infantry 1v1, in part due to their splash attacks that constantly knock everything down so that they cannot be hit back, which of course makes them surprisingly survivable in melee too. They have really high mass of 400, double that of Longbeards, which are already extremely difficult to pull through. They are very resilient against spells because of that innate spell resist on low model count. They just don't really care about vortexes or direct damage spells, and they are immune to flanking, so rear charges don't imbue any penalties on them. They will quite literally beat the pus and piss out of Kugath in melee, and that is not something very many infantry can say. SEM, Cav, foot troops, if you take them head on, Wrathmongers will leave you a bloody, broken pile of flesh. Super spooky unit. And then the winged hussars arrived, coming down the mountainside. They turned the tide. The frozen counterparts of Khorne and the other headlining faction from the Warhammer 3 announcement cinematic, the unyielding bastion of Kislev, first on the frontline war against Chaos, and like the gyrocopter section for the Dawi, this is kind of a 2-for-1 special. Wing Lancers or Griffin Legion are interchangeable here, depending on how you want to analyze it, but for the purposes of this video, we're going Griffin Legion. Neither one will steer you wrong. Griffin Legion are a fantastic unit, and have been since Glorious Charge was introduced as a mechanic after Shadows of Change. They are fast, tanky, all-purpose cavalry whose charge bonus duration is doubled, which is a big deal when your charge bonus is already 72. It means they continue dealing significant HP damage for quite a bit longer than their counterparts from most other factions after that initial impact, and they also debuff enemy morale as if they were attacking from the flank, even if it's a frontal charge. From a practical battlefield standpoint, this means they can abuse enemy morale quite effectively with the stacking debuffs from Glorious Charge and Fear, then run them off the map without allowing them to rally. By far, the easiest and most effective way to abuse this is with the lore of Tempest, which is widely considered better than Ice in its current form. With the lore of Tempest, you wait until the Griffin Legion have unleashed their devastating charge into a target, then drop a Hawks of Mishka directly on the enemy unit. This will deal some damage, of course. More importantly, it will drop their leadership by 16, which will then stack with the -8 penalty from Fear and the -6 leadership penalty from Glorious Charge. And the Vortex deals 0 friendly fire damage. You cannot hurt your own cav by using this combo. So that is -30 morale on top of the significant burst damage those Elite Knights will be doing on impact with their 72 charge. There are a lot of units in Warhammer 3 that will not stand and fight under those conditions, and once they've won the cav fight and eliminated the fast movers, Griffin Legion have the mobility and free reign to basically just pick an army apart. And of course, we have to mention Buy Our Blood, which is an incredible army passive that makes even low-tier Kislevite fodder fight to the death, essentially. But it's arguably even more useful on cav units, because in those rare instances when they have to play defensively against much scarier units, say the Sky Strider Rhinox Crushers or Skull Crushers of Khorne, those kinds of things, they will tarp it and hold that unit back without being chased off the map in the way that most other cav units would. Normally, you take a charge from Rhinox Cavalry, you're breaking soon after, then they're running you off the map and you don't get to return to the fold. buy our blood ensures they tarp it and hold the line for a long time in a really dire scenario, and give you, the player, time to reinforce it and change the outcome. That means the Rhinox Cav can't move onto your back line and kill the rest of your army. This is a vicious, well-rounded Cav that can be used effectively against many of the playable factions in Immortal Empires, and if you want a bit more cost efficiency, Wing Lancers are basically just a lighter version, but have a similar approach to combat. For the Lizardmen, the children of the old ones, the fat toad mummies of the stars, and their Aztec space laser dinosaur compatriots, it has to be the clever girls, dude. It's Jurassic Park Raptor time, and Cold One Spear Riders are the best for all the same reasons that Dark Elf Cold One Knights are. Everything great about Cold One Knights is also true for Cold One Spear Riders, and in fact, they can actually beat Cold One Knights in a raw 1v1 as long as Murderous Prowess does not activate while they engage. Spear Riders are a 1,000 gold, anti-large, AP shielded cav unit that trades effectively into mounted troops from any roster. They want that 1v1, and when they get it, they're going to make it hurt. One thing to note, though, is that because of how their respective rosters are constructed, Lizardmen Spear Riders don't necessarily have the same opportunities that the Dark Elves do. They don't have a fast, light cav unit like Dark Riders that can force and facilitate an engagement to cover for and accentuate their middling 66 speed. This means they're arguably not quite as good as Cold One Knights when looking at their rosters holistically and the synergies that make them work, but because of that elliptical model change and their innate AP and 14 bonus versus large, they are brutal to fight and a big time threat on an open battlefield regardless. Far from civilization and the sprawling temple constructs of the Cloaca Council, the northern reaches of frozen purgatory are haunted by the howls of the ravenous. Norsca is up to bat, and Ice Wolves are on the prowl. If you remember, last time we did this was for the base factions of Warhammer 3, and the Fleshhounds of Khorne made the shortlist then. What was the reasoning? Surprisingly high impact damage, great mobility, truly incredible units for flanking and running down routing troops, and a battlefield force multiplier that can be anywhere exactly when they're needed. Well, Ice Wolves do all the same things at a significantly cheaper price. They're considered by high-level Norsca players as a unit you never want to leave home without. 3 or 4 in every build, no questions asked. They'll enable every other unit on the roster and help them do their job better. And for some reason, they have almost double the mass of Fleshhounds, which means their impact and collision damage far outstrips similar profile units like Ogre Sabertusk and the aforementioned Houndos of Khorne. Combining that abnormally high mass with Frostbite, anything that gets touched by them is pinned and no longer moving. And as with many units on this list, they're a unit that takes agency away from the enemy and gives it to you, allowing you to punish out-of-position troops and micro-mistakes incredibly hard for a very cheap package. And they have crazy synergy with Skinwolves and Marauder Horsemasters when stacked with Plague of Rust. They are unyielding, relentless on the chase with 95 speed, Strider, and a 30% contact slow to anything they attack, so what people do is, they pounce on a unit when it's out of position, slow it with the Ice Wolves, overlap with Skinwolves, then Plague of Rust it while hitting it with the Javelins. Without the Ice Wolves, that combo would simply not be possible, and it's one of the more effective ways they have for eliminating high-value troops. Simply put, they're one of the best catch and kill units in the entire game, hitting well above their weight class. Now when it comes to Nurgle, the blessed bile of Bubos, phlegm, blood and guts, boils, bogies, rot and pus, blisters, fevers, and weeping sores, that all grants true immortality in the eyes of Grandpappy Plague. And it's a bit ironic because with many of these races, their best unit is also the thing that is their quintessential archetype, a unit that exemplifies all the traits that make that faction in the first place. Wrathmongers being a prime example for Khorne, angry Doom Guy meatheads who rip and tear in melee. That's what you expect, right? For Nurgle, it's actually kind of the opposite, because their quintessential demonic units are low armor, big hitbox, slow, and often kind of bad, or mediocre anyway. Their regiments of renown, like the Rotting Riders, are widely considered some of the best units in the game. They have amazing RORs as a faction, but their baseline roster isn't exactly spectacular, even after Thrones of Decay. The last time we did this, we picked the Soul Grinder of Nurgle, because it was a relatively fast-moving and heavily armored unit with a powerful range attack, which is not how the rest of the roster functioned at the time, and we'll be doing something similar here, picking a unit that doesn't really fit the traditional archetypes of Nurgle. Rot Knights are the best, in large part due to the fact that they aren't slow, low armor, squishy pieces of crap with a gigantic hitbox. They were decent when Thrones of Decay dropped, but have since received some really big buffs, actually, plus 20 armor, a 100 gold price decrease, and significantly more leadership buffs that essentially made them a better version of Skullcrushers of Khorne with regen. And regen on a elite cavalry unit is a big deal. It's really rare in this trilogy. And they fill a battlefield niche that Nurgle absolutely needs. Actually fast, not just for Nurgle, but in general fast at 75 speed. Mobile, armor-piercing troops that can crack open enemy monsters and cavalry with an additional 10 bonus versus large to help in that role. They are a legitimate win condition unto themselves, with the ability to solo carry battles for you, and they are, as we said, exceedingly rare amongst elite cavalry units in that they have regeneration. As you can imagine, constant passive healing on a unit with high armor and mobility with low model count is really damn good, and in fact is considered so attractive that most Nurgle builds in land battle now bring 3 of them. Opponents of Nurgle will game plan specifically to counter them because they're often considered the only big-time threat to deal with. For the rodents of unusual size, there is also one clear answer, and if you've played Vermintide, you know them well and fear and despise them in equal measure. The mighty Poison Wind Globadiers take the top spot, and in my opinion, I don't think it's particularly close. Simply put, anything over 20 models they happen to yeet those annoying little green globes of gas at dies, and it dies fast. Elite cavalry with shields, don't care, tie them down with slaves, and explode them. Swordmasters of Hoeth, dead in a few volleys. Their burst is almost unparalleled. A good volley can take like 60% off a unit. They can pay for themselves in 1 or 2 volleys. They can outright rout cav units in 1 or 2 volleys. And they don't just have 1 or 2 volleys, they have 18 of them. Really simple formula for Poison Wind Globadiers is that if you run inventory and find that you're out of globes and the little ratmen that threw them are still standing, you won the game. If they fired all of their ammunition, they probably like quintupled their value, if not more, killing the entire enemy army in the process. They could unironically go down to like 5 ammunition and still be considered a good unit, but they don't have 5, they have 18 shots. That's how much damage Poison Globes do, and they're super cheap too, only 650 gold. They are legitimate walking Skaven war crimes that single-handedly prop the entire race up at least a tier and dictate the entire meta on both sides of the matchup. If you're playing Skaven, you're wondering how best to apply them because they're your win condition if you bring them, and you should be bringing them. If you're playing against Skaven, you're doing everything you possibly can in your planning phase and later on with your micro to ensure they are not allowed to carry the day. And in true Ratman fashion, it also plays havoc with both yours and your opponent's computers in real life too. The DOT particle effects are maybe the most intrusive in the entire game. They will dumpster everybody's FPS and turn a battle into a slideshow while draping every unit hit by them in this impenetrable, ugly smoke, completely obscuring them. Very annoying, but super good unit. On to the Tomb Kings of Ancient Nehekara. If it fits, it sits. Show me your war face. Meow! It's the war kitty. The perfect companion that Cetra dearly misses in his own starting army. I do miss those tier 5 starting units in campaign, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, if RORs were included here, this would have probably been the Chosen the Gods Ushabti, easily. Literally a top 5 unit in the game, period. But outside of some super good regiments of renown, the Tomb Kings are much like Cathay or the Empire, where combined arms tactics and balanced compositions are typically what carry the day. The closest thing they have right now to a standout piece that goes above and beyond to carry battles is the Khemrian War Sphinx. Visually, it's stunning. Performance-wise, it's awesome. In Dom for clearing points, in land battle for breaking down boxes, in campaign for just about everything. And it's in that class of single-entity monster, alongside Dreadsaurians and Frostworms and a few others, that causes devastating impact and collision-based damage, but it has the added benefit of a truly nasty set of animations that push that even further. There are few things in this trilogy more satisfying than a flank charge on infantry with the Khemrian War Sphinx, which will turn even elite foot troops into fountains of blood and twitching gristle. That bounding, leaping charge animation can quite literally one-shot lower tier fodder if it's lined up correctly, racking up 100 plus kills in only a handful of seconds. But perhaps what's more surprising about this unit is how effective it can be against cavalry. There's a couple things at play here. Number 1, it can chain attack animations together in quick succession much faster than other similar monsters because of its high turn speed, which resets it into an attacking state more frequently, allowing it to quickly rack up damage into stuff like Cold One Knights. And number 2, it has incredibly easy access to Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades, which in my opinion is an auto include for Tomb King's Lords because it's cheap, spammable, procs the Lore of Nakara army-wide heal passive, and the Overcast version of Jaff's gives 16 bonus for large, and more weapon damage for only 5 winds of magic, so you can basically cast that the entire battle. Not only is the turn speed and animation set helping a ton against units you would not expect it to be great against, you pretty much automatically have big uptime on a combat steroid from Cursed Blades that makes it truly deadly against any unit on the other side of the field, cav or monsters included. It's not even mentioning the fact that Usurian's Incantation of Vengeance is probably the most overpowered spell in the game right now. It's either that or Pavane of Slaanesh, and it does like 2,000 damage a pop to Wild Riders while slowing them, so cavalry isn't allowed to live versus Tomb Kings anyway. When the enemy's mass and mobility are gone, the War Sphinx will have a hell of a good time running over what's left. It is a super good monster with a lot of ways to impact the battle. On to the Shifting Isles of Perception, under the watchful gaze of the Raven God, Phantasmagoria, Rapid Mutation, and Change are the watchwords here. If Tzeentch didn't have Changebringers, it would be a bigger blow to their race than Skaven not having Poison Wind Globadiers. Let them cook. These are flame-spewing flyers made of chaos incarnate, showcasing the maddening incomprehensibility of the warp better than just about anything else in Immortal Empires. More importantly, they kind of just kill everything too. Ridiculous damage output, able to swing entire matchups in Tzeentch's favor single-handedly, and are a critical unit choice versus Beastmen, Greenskins, Norsca, Nurgle, really any faction that struggles to deal with flying and range troops, they will straight dookie on. On paper, and occasionally in practice, they are the highest damage output in the game, bar none, if everything hits. To be fair, that is a big if. They're really fast and hard or impossible to tie down, depending on who you're playing. They naturally have amazing flying support on the Tzeentch roster, which helps tremendously in keeping them alive and making back their expensive 1,500 gold cost. They don't take much damage from spells because of their low model count and the barrier overshield, and they're extremely dangerous to contest in air because what will generally happen if you send, say, Vargeists or Crowmen or Pegasus Knights after them, whatever you send to try to kill them, you're going to get hit by Gaze of Fate, frozen in place, netted down, then blasted with 2 point-blank volleys right to the dome, which will immediately render your flyer, well, rendered into a steaming pile of blubber. They are difficult to deal with for factions without an impressive air force or gunpowder options, and they force certain unit choices in army composition simply because they exist, whether they're brought to the battlefield or not. If Tzeentch decides to go all in with 3 Changebringers, and you are not prepared for it, it is pretty much an auto-lose scenario for a lot of races. Single entity monsters, characters, infantry, cavalry, monstrous infantry, skirmishers, doesn't really matter the unit archetype. If they're allowed to float safely over their choice of target and burn it, there won't be much left when they're done cooking. Hello, Poppet. For the Vampire Coast, still maybe the hypest I've ever been for anything in this trilogy when they were first revealed. Probably that and the Warhammer 3 announcement cinematic. The Undead Pirates of Lustria and Sartosa have zombie pirate handguns, which are widely considered the best gunpowder unit in Immortal Empires. And the reason is simple: accuracy and firepower through volume. High model count and health pool, huge burst damage from decent range, and they don't rout. Most skirmish units in the trilogy run screaming for the hills the second something touches them inappropriately, which is fair and reasonable, but zombie dickhands are like honey badgers. They don't give a shit. I mean, this is an unbreakable gunpowder unit with 120 armor-piercing models that only cost 550 gold. Sure, you can maybe tie 1 or 2 up, but you're not going to chase them away. Unless you fully saturate the unit, it's still going to be shooting you. More importantly, there will also be 2 or 3 more blasting you apart from point-blank range, punishing that play heavily. In the beginning stages of battle, their extra powder passive gives them 30% extra missile damage, which means even more burst damage in those crucial opening salvos. And unlike Changebringers or Poison Wind Globes and some of the other range units on this list, they don't really need a stationary target to drop a unit in seconds. They shoot guns. Bullets fly fast and far, and when they hit, they poke lots of big nasty holes into dragons, evaporate flyers, a unit archetype that handguns are actually exceptionally good for murdering, and generally anything without a hefty dose of missile resist or a big-ass tower shield. There is a reason that guns put knights and samurai out of business historically. You could train for 20 years and a single ball of lead from a barely trained peasant would end those delusions of grandeur in a heartbeat. Put enough gats into the hands of mindless zombie automatons instead of Ashigaru, and apparently that theme still holds true. Into the home stretch now, the vampire counts of Sylvania have some really good units to choose from. There's the stable workhorse Cryptors, the bullying and utterly unique profile of the Varghulf, the win condition that is the Mortis engine. If it stays alive, you die. But right now, I think we have to go with Vargheists and their hauntingly robust bush. Bring in the 70s back, baby. Vargheists are a fantastic unit that belongs to a fairly rare archetype in Immortal Empires, that of flying monstrous cavalry, and we've already picked one of those on this list with the Royal Hippogriff Knights. We've already talked in depth about what units like this can do, how they always get to pick and choose their engagements, deny enemy charge bonus, land in backlines to kill skirmishers, then transition to kill stuff on enemy walls with impunity, rear charge, cav, what have you. But this is a different style than the Royal Hippogriff Knights, and certainly they don't have the same kind of staying power. Here's the thing. They cost less than half of what Royal Hippos cost, while delivering very similar amounts of damage. Sure, 10 armor is quite pathetic, they're basically naked, but it's a 92 speed flyer designed to completely overpower the backline and prevent shooting anyway. Vampire counts are really good at shutting down shooting, whether that be from zombie summons in the rear, fell bats, or Vargheist coming in to feast on your flesh. Ever since they were reworked to have majority AP and the Hunger, which regens their health while in melee, they've been considered a powerful and versatile unit, and they can swarm very easily with 3 or 4 rolling and hit squads together, being a very common sight. 110 weapon strength with frenzy and great melee attack values means they hit almost as hard as hippogriffs, and while they do need to be babysat and have a high micro attacks, the potential return on investment with them is huge. Again, they cost half of what Royal Hippos do. They can easily win aerial duels, shut down shooting, then rear charge the backs of infantry and cav alike, all in the same battle, which provides value in a way that even Blood Knights typically will not. Very efficient for shutting down kite builds and cyclocharging enemies into oblivion, and they're also extremely disruptive in melee, which combined with Hunger means they aren't as squishy as you think in CQB, as long as they aren't getting shot. For those who don't know, Hunger is regen in melee. If they're fighting something in melee, they're getting health regen. It's a similar feature set they have to Wrathmongers, actually, where their splash attacks and particularly their charge bonus animations are constantly bowling units over, preventing them from getting hit in return. You get a ton of versatility and killing power out of a fairly cheap package, a unit that can take over games when handled well, and it also helps that they look kind of dope, like if Dracula made a love child with Super Saiyan Goku. If we head straight north from the dead marshes of Sylvania towards the edges of the known world, we'll run into the Warriors of Chaos and the Warhost of the Apocalypse, the ever-chosen Gang. And if the Ice Wolves of Norsca are in the running for top 3 best light cav adjacent units in the game, then the Hellstriders of Slaanesh probably take the top spot, which, if I remember correctly, was true in 8th edition tabletop for Warhammer Fantasy as well. I feel like they were considered busted on the tabletop, but I could be wrong. Anyway, in Warhammer 3, they've had a long, tumultuous road. They were probably the most cost-effective cavalry unit near launch when there were only 6 or 7 factions. Slaanesh was at the top of the meta for a while then promptly got nerfed and were probably the worst faction in the game, and ever since the elliptical model change and some other buffs have been the best again, and that will likely be further amplified when Tides of Torment comes out this summer. Just like Seekers and Cold Ones, their Steeds of Slaanesh mount dictates model collision, and elliptical models let them pile in better and perform much better in melee without bouncing off or blocking each other. They're better than Centaurs for a cheaper price, a unit that is already considered quite good, and are an auto pick for the Warriors of Chaos, who simply don't have many inexpensive anti-cavalry options to choose from. They are brutal in cav fights, and for shutting down enemy kite builds, punching up into armored units like Empire Knights without much issue, able to catch and kill stuff like War Wagons that are difficult for many other factions to deal with. They're immune to psychology, fear, and poison, with 10 bonus versus large is such a potent combination for only 675 gold, and unlike Seeker Demonic Cavalry, when they break, they don't crumble. They quickly gain space, then return to combat from the edges of the map, which can be a really nasty surprise for skirmishers or cavalry who thought they were safe. They're like, oh, we dealt with the cav, no biggie, and then that unit that was running all the way to the edges of the map comes back and rear charges you just when you thought you were in a good situation. Soul Hunters is a nice little bonus for them for the morale, ward save, and charge buffs the more they kill, but it's not super impactful, honestly. But their synergy with the roster and the unique role they fill upon it are indispensable to the Warriors of Chaos right now. There's a really strong mobility combo you can do with them, paired with Rot Knights and Azazel, that sees a lot of play at high levels. Essentially, you used to only be able to bring 4 marked units, which meant you couldn't bring 2 Rot Knights, 2 Hellstriders, and Azazel together. That cap was more recently raised to 5 though, which opens up the combo with Pavane of Slaanesh, which we've already said is a top 3 spell alongside Usirian's Incantation of Vengeance. You direct damage and rampage a target out of position, the Hellstriders and Rot Knights gangbang the target, the Dark Prince smiles, everybody finishes. It's a good time in the warp. This change was implemented around the same time that Hellstriders and Rot Knights and Pavane were all buffed, and lo and behold, suddenly those successive buffs took a bad faction into a different echelon entirely, unlocking some powerful new playstyles. Hellstriders are awesome, likely the best light cav unit in the game right now. And finally, we have the Wood Elves of Athelloren. Oh dear, Wild Riders are taking the top spot. If there's been one trend that myself and competitive players tend to value in this list, it's high mobility units that hit super hard, then retreat and reposition with ease so they can always be where they are needed. And Wild Riders are an amazing example of this principle in action. It is a perfect representation of a glass cannon, micro-intensive unit with Vanguard deployment, fear, and all kinds of nifty little bonuses like the Woodsman trait so they can engage in forest without penalty. They have an Azrai Tower shield, so they have a 55% missile block chance instead of the standard 30 or 35% that most other shielded cav units get, and that shielded variant is very much worth the extra 100 gold, plus 6 melee defense is nothing to sneeze at, helps them survive a lot longer in melee. Most importantly, they're lightning fast and hit really damn hard. They wreck unbraced infantry, are brutally effective in that role, or running down archers, artillery, and gunpowder troops, and they aren't as squishy as you'd think because of that high missile block chance and 20% physical resistance. There's also a really fun combo you should give a try when you get the chance. Shield of Thorns from the Lore of Life can actually be stacked with itself if one source comes from your spellcaster in the form of an Overcast, and the other comes from the bounce spell from Sisters of the Thorn. Overcast Shield of Thorns is 28 damage reflect, bounce spell from Sisters is 14 reflect, so what you can do is stack those together when taking a cav fight against things that Wild Riders typically don't want to engage straight up, like Rot Knights or Skull Crushers or Chaos Knights, Rhinox, what have you. These are heavily armored elite cavalry that cost almost twice as much as Wild Riders, and they will jib themselves taking that fight head on, severely damaging or outright destroying themselves on the charge if they're not paying attention. You can actually do that for Glade Riders as well, but the Wild Riders will actually finish the job and eliminate them on the retreat, while Glade Riders typically don't have the damage output for that. Wild Riders are a very high skill ceiling unit that requires a lot of focus and positioning to be used most effectively, but when piloted well, they can accrue insane value with startling consistency, and they are exactly what you'd expect from elite Azrai warhosts. And with that, this behemoth of a video is done. That is the list. Let me know which units you agree with and which you think should be replaced and why in the comment section below. And a big time shout out and thank you again to the Night Crew and XMT guys who joined me in a roundtable discussion to talk about and debate these units. They were super helpful and I appreciate them taking the time, as well as Creative Assembly for sponsoring this video and making this awesome game. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and a comment. This one took a lot of effort to put together. Share it with your homies, your family, your wife's boyfriend. Share it far and wide. This struggling YouTuber needs all the help he can get. I'm Any Pride from Milk and Cookies Total War, and I'll see you all in the next one.